Star Wars The Old Republic is a game that I have had a long on and off history with. Since its announcement in 2008, SWTOR has been a game that I wanted to love. I was a massive fan of KOTOR 1 and 2, and I still am, a big fan of World of Warcraft. So, the prospect of combining the persistent world and constant updates of World of Warcraft with the storytelling and world building of BioWare set in the Old Republic era of Star Wars sounded amazing, and I couldn't wait. I pre-ordered a copy, and when the game finally launched, I really enjoyed it for a time. After getting to max level, however, I quickly ran out of things I wanted to do and ended up going back to World of Warcraft just a few months after its release. I gave the game another shot with Rise of the Hutt Cartel, but the theme and the story, as well as the new zone and McKeb, were so off-putting, I never even made it to max level. I let Shadow Revan pass me by, and then, like millions of other players, my interest was piqued by the cinematic trailer for Knights of the Fallen Empire, and once again, I returned to the game. I loved the new storyline and was working on finishing every class story to achieve legendary player status. I was having a great time with the game as an RPG, just not as an MMO. The gearing system didn't interest me at all, and because of that, I fell off it once again. I returned for Knights of the Eternal Throne. I thoroughly enjoyed the story on multiple characters, but having already completed every class storyline, I ran out of things I wanted to do and let my sub lapse. And that brings us to Onslaught, the most recent expansion, which I was excited to give another shot after hearing it was completely revamping the way that gearing worked in SWTOR. In this video, I'm going to be looking at what makes up the endgame experience of SWTOR, and hopefully helping you make an informed decision on whether the game is worth returning to or picking up for the first time as an MMORPG. As a simple Star Wars RPG, there really is no question here. The game is 100% worth checking out, especially if you have never played it before, as it has some of the best Star Wars stories ever told. If you are a Star Wars fan, the Imperial Agent storyline is a must-play, as well as the Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne arcs. And I personally would highly recommend going through all the class stories as well as all the expansion stories. The game is completely free to try out, and as a new player you can do all of the original 8 class stories as well as every expansion up to Shadow of Revan, which is easily hundreds of hours of content completely free of charge. And then simply by subscribing for a single month for only $15, you gain access to Knights of the Fallen Empire, Knights of the Eternal Throne, and Onslaught. The value proposition here is insane. Free to play is fairly restrictive, but if you're just here for the story, then that shouldn't impact you too much. Although I would recommend just subbing anyway. If you plan on playing the game consistently, it's well worth it. Worst case scenario, you don't like the game and you spent no money on it, so there's your answer. If you're only interested in the game as a Star Wars RPG, then it's definitely worth checking out. If you decide to download the game, feel free to use my referral link to get some extra goodies in-game, as well as some free subscription time. That link will be in the description box down below, as well as the pinned comment. I should mention here that the new expansion storyline is only about 4 hours long, so if you have played everything else and you have no interest in the endgame, you might want to hold off until some later story patches have been released to get more out of your subscription. Now, let's talk about, is this game worth playing as an MMORPG, starting with the pros. Alright, let's get the obvious out of the way. As I briefly mentioned in my intro, storytelling in SWTOR is second to none. The stories and characters are incredibly well written, and given that this is an MMORPG, it allows the developers to tell stories that span across years of content. The best example of this is the Sith Emperor storyline, which is central to the main game, and is still being expanded on in Onslaught today. Not only that, but you can also make all kinds of choices in dialogue which can vastly impact the way the story plays out. There isn't too much more to say on this point outside of the fact that it's really well done. BioWare is known for their storytelling, and this game is no exception. Not only is the storytelling really well done, the storytelling is taking place in the most epic Star Wars era ever. This is of course personal preference, but the Old Republic era established in KOTOR 1 and 2 has always been a fan favorite and is easily my favorite era. It uses a lot of the sci-fi elements of Star Wars, but is far more fantastical than any other era. It is a time where there are thousands of Jedi and Sith and they battle across the galaxy. I mean, you would never see this in any other Star Wars era, and this is just amazing. The world itself is also very well done for the most part. Artistic direction and map design is very solid on almost every planet, but there are some misses. Remember how I mentioned hating McKeb? Well, the reason for that is the map is horribly designed, and I personally really hate the look of the zone. The map is sectioned off into 15 different disconnected sections. Each of these areas is tiny and overstuffed with enemies. Thankfully, this is one of the very few misses the game has, and the new zones added in Onslaught are absolutely stunning. So, despite some misses, the game has an awesome, beautiful world to explore set in an amazing era of the Star Wars universe. The combat in Star Wars The Old Republic is often listed as a con because it's tab targeting. However, I personally think that does a disservice to some of the extremely well-designed classes in the game. Yes, this is tab targeting combat, but it is tab targeting combat done right. Sometimes. Classes are very hit or miss. They are either great and come together to form a fun rotation, or are clunky, have too many abilities, and no satisfying core rotation. My favorite class is easily the Deception Assassin. In my opinion, it has just the right number of abilities and has an extremely fun core rotation with awesome utility. I like this class so much that I have 3 of them at max level, and I'm actively working on getting more to max. Finding the right class for an MMORPG is incredibly important, and thankfully, I found mine. If I didn't enjoy this spec as much as I do, I wouldn't be nearly as into this game as I am. I am also a massive fan of the Lightning Sork and the Virulent Sniper. Now that I've established that there are good classes and that combat is a positive in my opinion, let's talk about the negatives of combat. First off, it's hit or miss. Some classes are great while others just feel bad to play. Some classes feel dynamic and interesting, while others feel extremely static. Another big problem for many classes is ability bloat. There are so many abilities for any given spec that I was having trouble finding places to keybind them, and I use a Razer Naga mouse, so I don't have a lack of options. I would recommend checking out a few classes before deciding on what you want to play at endgame. Second, the UI sucks in certain regards, mainly dot tracking. SWTOR doesn't allow for add-ons, so that means that there are no weak auras or anything like that if you're familiar with World of Warcraft. The most you can do to track your dots is slightly organize this massive blob of debuffs. You can't make certain debuffs bigger unless you make every single debuff bigger. It really sucks, and it ruins most dot-based specs in the game. At least for me. Not being able to track my debuffs effectively is a massive turnoff. Another downside of the combat, at least in the open world, is that your companion is extremely overpowered and effectively trivializes 99% of the open world content. It kind of removes all the tension from the situation when you realize you can't die and your companion's just gonna heal you through it anyway. That doesn't mean it isn't fun to go kill bad guys in the open world, it just means death won't really be a possibility unless you're doing group quests solo. On the flip side, the power fantasy and class design really shines through here. When I'm playing my Sith Assassin, I feel like I am a Sith Assassin, and when I'm playing my Sith Sork, I feel like I am a Master of Lightning. This is aided by the fact that mobs in the open world are organized into groups, meaning you will be fighting 2 to 6 mobs in each pack, making you feel like a powerful Jedi or a badass Sith. All in all, the core combat is extremely strong, and when paired with great class design, taking part in combat can be an absolute blast. Player expression is possibly one of SWTOR's strongest points. This comes in the form of appearance customization and strongholds. Appearance customization in this game is pretty great. First off, the character creator is pretty in-depth and gives you a lot of options. It's not nearly as much as some Eastern MMOs I've seen, but it definitely gets the job done. In-game, you can transmog any armor slot via the outfit system. This is not restricted by class, so you can be a bounty hunter who wears Sith robes or a Jedi who prefers power suits. Not only this, but you can also dye any armor slot to make your favorite set of armor a different color. A key element in dyeing is the Unify Color option, which matches the color of all your armor pieces to your chest piece. So you dye your chest piece in Unify colors to get the rest of the set dyed. This can be done while leveling in order to make all your gear match. Dyes are either crafted or bought off the cartel market and are consumed on use. Don't worry, we'll talk about that later. There's a massive number of appearances to collect and you can make your character look like whatever you want. The other major aspect of player expression is Strongholds. Strongholds is SWTOR's version of player housing and it's extremely well done. At the time of writing there are a good number of Strongholds in the game and there is a new one about to be added. The Alderaan Stronghold is coming sometime early 2020. There are hundreds upon hundreds of decorations that you can place all over your Stronghold. This is admittedly a part of the game that I haven't gotten that much into yet. I just kind of threw some decorations down, so sorry my house looks so crappy. Anyway, each room has hooks which can hold decorations, and you can change the layout of these hooks to a number of preset options. There is a massive amount of potential here. You are allotted a lot of freedom and can do all kinds of stupid stuff like putting a Rancor hologram underneath the ocean. There are a massive number of people who play this game solely for the player expression aspect, and the roleplay community is very much alive in SWTOR. SWTOR's endgame is largely based around evergreen content. Basically, what I mean is that every flashpoint operation and daily area is considered current content. You could go do a flashpoint added at the launch of SWTOR at level 75 and everything would scale to make it feel like current content, and it would give current rewards. This is either a massive positive or a massive negative depending on how you look at it. If you're a new player, it means you can experience all the content added to the game over the years as current content, which is great. But if you're a returning player, you might look at it as, oh damn it, back to farming Hammer Station. For me, this is a massive positive, because not only does it mean I get to see all the content from throughout the game's life, it also means there's a massive amount of variety in content at endgame, which can help keep the content feeling fresh and interesting. Let's talk about that variety of content. Okay, there's a massive amount of stuff to cover here, so let's start by talking about PvE open world content. I love, and I mean love, the open world content of this game. The open world content largely consists of daily hubs, which some might consider a negative, but I consider to be a massive positive because, well, I love dailies. And dailies in this game are very well executed, outside of 1 to 2 reputations. Working towards these reputations has been a blast, and I am only legend status with a few, and I am having a great time working on the others. The other major part of open world content is planetary heroic dailies. Basically, there are a number of 2-player missions on most planets. These are really fun and I love farming them up, especially with another player. However, they can be easily soloed. There are a few world bosses to kill and tons of achievements to track down, but for the most part, the open world consists of dailies, and that is just fine by me. Flashpoints are SWTOR's version of dungeons. Their quality and difficulty vary dramatically. I know, this is becoming a theme. Some flashpoints are really well done with fun and interesting boss fights with great pacing. Red Reaper, Hammer Station, Aethys are just a few examples of phenomenal dungeon design. The mechanics tend to be simple in nature, like for example, Lord whatever. His mechanic is that he will summon 2 acolytes with shields, and he will start channeling Force Lightning on a player. In order to break the acolyte's shield and kill them, the player needs to position the ad between them and the boss and then interrupt the acolyte so the acolyte shields break and they get electrified. This is a very simple mechanic, but it's also a very fun and satisfying mechanic. On the flip side of that, you have flashpoints with way too much trash, and overtuned bosses, and boring tank and spank fights. An example of this is Kuat Drive Yards. The final boss in this place is ridiculously overtuned compared to everything else in vet mode, and it causes many groups to fall apart when they get to the end of the dungeon. For the most part, flashpoints are really good fun, but they have their highs and lows. Flashpoints come in 3 difficulties: Story Mode, Veteran Mode, and Master Mode. Story Mode is there for players who don't want a challenge and just want to see the story. Veteran Mode is the normal mode of the Flashpoint that most players will be doing, and Master Mode is the hard mode that will require much better play to overcome. For the most part, Master Mode dungeons add some interesting mechanics that change up the fights. Sadly, a good number of bosses fall into the trap of just having more health, but I personally have been having a great time jumping into Master Mode Flashpoints with my guild. Flashpoints are definitely a highlight of the game for me, and I really enjoy running them. The biggest form of PvE endgame content in SWTOR is called Ops, where you team up with either 7 or 15 other players in order to overcome challenging opponents. I'll be upfront with you guys. I thought I would hate these. I love raiding in World of Warcraft, and I knew these bosses would be far simpler and have way less mechanics. I was expecting to be bored with the bosses and not like them at all. Quite the opposite happened. I love doing ops in this game. In fact, it's one of the main reasons I'm sticking with the game long term, because damn, these are fun. While the bosses are far simpler than something like WoW, it's almost a relief to have a straightforward fight without 20 pages of explanation or a 40-minute guide. It's not all good though. There definitely are a few fights that verge on being way too simple and just are tank and spank fights. I have, however, found Ops to be amazingly fun, and I can't exactly put my finger on why. Playing Deception Assassin certainly contributes, but at the fear of sounding cheesy, there's something magical about raiding in MMOs, and this game has recaptured that for me. Not sure why, not sure how, but it has. Ops come in 3 difficulties: Story Mode, Hard Mode, and Nightmare Mode. I have only gone up to Hard Mode, and I have no real intention of pushing into Nightmare Mode, but from what I've heard, if you want a real challenge, it's waiting for you there in Nightmare Mode. Ops have been incredibly fun for me, and I look forward to clearing them all on hard mode. There's a decent amount of content that doesn't cleanly fall into any of these categories. For example, there's a space combat game mode that is actually pretty fun. It's like Star Fox and Star Wars, although the game mode hasn't seen any updates in many years. There's the Eternal Championship, which is a solo challenge where you face off against a number of challenging bosses in an arena, which is quite fun and challenging. There is a massive amount of PvE content that has been added to this game over the years, and exploring and discovering it all is a ton of fun. Okay, so I know very little about PvP in general, but especially in this game. All I can tell you is that there are war zones, which are large-scale team battles, there are arena matches, which are small-scale team battles, and then there's open-world PvP. Both war zones and arena are pretty alive, but they have smaller player bases, and apparently in ranked you run into the same people constantly, and it's a pretty toxic environment, which isn't exactly unusual for a game like this. And then you have world PvP, which is completely dead. The few times I have done PvP in this game, I have really enjoyed it, but I'm not a PvPer, so that really doesn't mean that much. Oh, and Hutball is a genuinely amazing game mode that is basically football in Star Wars. It's pretty great. Overall, there is a lot of variety and forms of content that you can do, and thanks to the evergreen way the game is set up, you can do any of the content added throughout the game's history, so it'll take a while to get through. The wide array of content in this game is one of the biggest positives, in my personal opinion. Okay, let's talk about crew skills. Crew skills is SWTOR's version of professions, and I actually really like what they've done with it. Each character can have 3 crew skills, and there are 3 different types. Crafting, which is for crafting items, obviously. Gathering, which is for gathering materials, again, very straightforward. And then there are missions, which allow you to send your companions out on missions in order to get different mission-only materials that are required for crafting. It's a fairly basic system, but the progression paths in crew skills are very satisfying. Not only that, but they are also core to the endgame of SWTOR. Crafters can make augments, which are a massive part of kitting out your character at the endgame. It feels really nice to have crew skills and crew skill materials relevant in endgame, with a solid progression system built around them. Speaking of progression systems, let's talk about hands down my favorite aspect of the game: power progression. Power progression is handled masterfully in Star Wars The Old Republic, and it completely blew me away. I had gotten to max level, and was kind of disappointed with the length of the story, and then I started to gear up, and I absolutely fell in love. The process can be broken down into a number of steps. Step 1, get your item rating up to 306 by doing any content in the game that rewards gear. That could be any number of things ranging from flashpoints to conquest. Then you start saving up tech fragments, the new currency of this expansion, to buy your best in slot set bonus off your class vendor on the fleet. Once you have your BIS armor, then you can start min-maxing your mods by collecting enhancements, mods, barrels, hilts, and armorings with the best stats for your character. Once you've done that, you can move on to augmenting your gear. You turn to crafting in order to unlock your augment slots and craft your augments. And then you're done. That's it. There is an endpoint. You now do amazing DPS. So enjoy it. I honestly cannot express in words how much I love this progression system. And the reason is simple. It gives me clear goals to work towards, and all of these goals are achievable and satisfying to achieve. This game isn't trying to keep you on the grind for the next 50 years. It's giving you an awesome and satisfying gearing up experience to enjoy. And enjoy it I have. I'm almost done getting the last of my augments, and I can honestly say that the power progression system has been the best power progression system in any game I have ever had the pleasure of playing. I mean, wow. It's very straightforward, it's extremely fun, and it's immensely rewarding. It's everything I want out of a power progression system, and I cannot wait to do it on alts. This is the reason I got hooked. I want to write another 20 paragraphs gushing about how much I love this system, but I'll refrain, as you probably get the point by now. This system is amazing, and it just enriches the game as a whole. Speaking of amazing progression systems, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Conquest. Basically, everything you do in the game gives you conquest points, and each week, your character is rewarded for hitting 50k conquest points with valuable crafting mats, credits, and gear. This system not only encourages you to pick up and play alts, which is something I love, but it also rewards you for playing the game however you want. If you want to do daily areas to reach conquest, do it. If you want to spam flashpoints, do it. It gives you loads of freedom and is really fun to work towards on multiple characters throughout the course of the week. There are also guild conquests to work towards, which allow guilds to invade planets and compete with other guilds on their server for control of a planet. It's actually quite a cool system, and seeing your guild control a planet and knowing you contributed to that is a really good feeling. I'll stop gushing about Conquest now, but I love the system, and the way that it incentivizes gameplay is really natural and really, really awesome. I also have to say that the alt experience in this game is incredible. Alts are insanely easy to pick up and get geared. First off, that grind of 306 I talked about before, it doesn't exist on alts. You simply buy an alt 306 gear with your tech fragments on your main, and you can send it over to them, and there you go, you're done. Even beyond that, your gear is legacy bound, meaning you can send your fully maxed out gear to an alt, and they can just use it. This even works across factions. I have 2 Sith Assassins and 1 Jedi Shadow, and I use the same armor set on all 3. I just pass it around and do amazing DPS on all of them thanks to the armor. It's great. Alts are also incredibly useful. Those valuable crafting mats you get for hitting Conquest can be a great way to make credits, and the more alts you have, the more you can get. I have never seen a game that is more alt friendly than this game is, and I love it. There is so much more that I wish I could talk about in this video, but it's already going to be ridiculously long, so I will move on to the negatives. So I alluded multiple times to variance being a major issue with the game, and yeah, it is. Some classes are great fun, while others are just boring. Some flashpoints are fun, others suck. Some ops bosses are interesting, and some just are boring tank and spank fights. I know this exists in every MMORPG in existence, but it is even more apparent here, at least in my opinion. There isn't much more to say on the subject, just some stuff sucks, while other stuff is incredible. Another con is that the game is pretty standard. This is another pretty simple point, but this game doesn't do anything new or different. Outside of its storytelling, this is a very standard MMO. I don't really consider this a negative personally, because it's a really well done standard MMO, but a lot of people will view that as a negative. One of the most obvious cons is that the game is very much a smaller MMO that doesn't get nearly as much support as industry titans like World of Warcraft. The population is very active, but it is on the smaller side. There isn't much in terms of guides for current content, which is something I'm hoping to fix a little bit with this channel, and information on the game in general is just scarce. The game also isn't updated as often as something like WoW, and the patches this game receives are smaller. That doesn't make the game not worth playing, just know what you're getting into with this. It's not going to be updated very often, and it isn't a massive game, although Onslaught does seem to be doing really well for itself. Alright, well, I can't have a cons section without talking about the in-game cash shop, can I? Before I get into this, let me make one thing clear. The game wouldn't be around if it wasn't for the cash shop. The cartel market, as it's called, is what's keeping this game alive. Obviously, it's still a cash shop, and it still sucks that all these awesome armor sets are locked behind a paywall, but for once it is necessary, given the game's population. The game is only kinda pay to win, as in you can't pay for power or anything, but you can pay to boost the influence of your companions to max, which will speed up your crafting, but it's fairly minor. It also is worth mentioning that anything on the cash shop can be bought and sold for credits on the GTN, the player-run auction house. So if you really want a cartel market item, you can simply buy it off another player with credits. This is a fairly reasonable cash shop, and it doesn't do anything too offensive. I go easy on it because it's vital to the game's continued survival, but of course, the game would be better without it. This game seriously lacks polish at points, and it can be quite stunning. One of the worst examples of this is clipping. Almost every armor set in the game clips through itself somehow. It's actually extremely annoying to get an awesome looking armor set and then realize it's constantly clipping like crazy. It just kind of ruins it. You can also get stuck all the time, and bugs are pretty abundant in the game. Nothing game breaking, but they are pretty common. One example of this that really struck me as funny is that in the SOA ops fight, you just jump down onto a platform that doesn't actually exist yet. And this stuff just kind of exists throughout the game. There's just a general lack of polish. And the final con of this video is that the game has an uncertain future. There is no telling how much longer this game will be around, so this could be the last expansion the game ever gets, or there could be many, many more. We just don't really know. Here's what I will say though. Even if this is the last expansion, even if the game shuts down tomorrow, I will be glad I got into the game and I was able to see all that it had to offer. This game is a flawed masterpiece, and I am so glad I decided to give it another chance. I hope you all enjoyed the video and found it useful. If you did, hit that like button, and if you're interested in SWTOR news, guides, and discussions, hit that subscribe button because I plan on making this channel solely focused on SWTOR. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.